GTA 3 came out in 2001 and revolutionized gaming as it demonstrated the popularity that could be achieved by presenting open worlds. This was followed up not only with GTA 4 and so on, but also with Bethesda's games in the following years, leading up to Skyrim in 2011. Also, the same year as Skyrim was Dark Souls. And with the release of Dark Souls, it would change the industry over the course of the next decade and a half, almost. The first, Dark Souls is a great game, one of my favorites, if not my favorite, and it, it was great. FromSoft continued to produce these, and a bunch of other people tried to copy them with some moderate success, although that's easily debated. What also came out of Dark Souls was the video essayist, the long form one at least. And while this is not necessarily something that was explicitly generated by Dark Souls, it certainly was greatly popularized by doing videos about Dark Souls. Joseph Anderson got his start this way, doing like a 6-part series. Skip forward to 2022 and Elden Ring releases, where the open world and the Soulsborne series has finally merged together to create Elden Ring, which was one game of the year, I believe, in 2022. And some people had some problems with it. Joseph Anderson, going back to him, found the rewards to be lackluster, the exploration to be underwhelming, and the bosses to be far too difficult. Everyone agreed with him at the time, and although this public opinion has since changed to believe that the bosses are hard, yes, but not that hard, it remains that his video was a major shift of public opinion at the time. Or it was less of a shift and more, I believe, of a reinforcement of public opinion, where no one really wanted to say the bosses were too hard, but they were. Now, skip forward 2 years, and we have Shadow of the Erdtree, the DLC for Elden Ring. And this time the bosses actually were too hard. But also not. Because the main problem that Joseph Anderson had with the bosses in Elden Ring was the fact that he couldn't see what was going on. He couldn't predict. It was Dark Souls, the original combat, was very turn-based, right? You do an attack, the enemy does an attack, which you can block, right? It's this very, it's almost like it is turn-based almost, but it's like as if if you took an RPG and you brought it forward into real time. It's real-time turn-based combat, which is not actually a thing, but it's the best way to describe what Dark Souls does. Now, this progressed. In Dark Souls 2, they slowed the combat down and nobody liked it. Except for H-Bomber Guy, but different discussion. Then they came out with Bloodborne, where they accelerated everything completely, right? It's much more about aggression. Now, I have personally never played Bloodborne, but it's much faster, it's much more aggressive, and I believe it's called the Revive. No, it's not the Revive mechanic. It's the stuff that when you get hit, you can attack the enemy and get health back. Cool, got it. So, Bloodborne was faster. This continuing of the speed was continued. Speeding the games up was continued in Dark Souls 3. This is something I found. I don't like how fast Dark Souls 3 is, especially coming back from Elden Ring, having never played Dark Souls 3 before. Elden Ring is fluid, and it feels much more. It feels fluid. It feels like you and the boss can actually dance. Dark Souls 3, you're stuck playing Dark Souls 1, albeit a little bit faster and smoother with more polish, against bosses which, while designed for the moveset, are not nearly as the same. Or nearly as well, I would say. I talked about that in my last video. But over the course of the 2 years since Joseph Anderson's video, people made the point that no, the bosses weren't too hard. You just needed to learn them. Joseph's problem, as explained by Feeble King in his defense of the Elden Ring bosses video, was that he didn't want to spend the amount of time it took to learn them. And frankly, no one else did. Like, if you're a challenge runner doing level 1 runs of the game, good on you. I don't want to spend that much fucking time on a single game, much less a single boss. Like, why? Good job, but why? So, Feeble King made this video, which is a good video. I enjoyed it. Actually, I enjoy all the videos I'm going to mention, but this one is important because it expressed why people dislike the bosses much more clearly than I think. Actually, no, Joseph did it clear, and then Feeble recapped. But Feeble explained why the bosses were actually good and fun. And they are fun, once you know how to learn them, once you know how to play against them. Which, I didn't know fog was a weather effect in Shadow of the Erdtree, but that is pretty cool. Or is my render distance fucking... No, that's fog. Back to what I was saying. Feeble King explained why the bosses were actually good, but made the point that Elden Ring does not take the time to actually teach any of its mechanics to the player in a way that is clear and understandable, which I largely agree with, even if it's not entirely true, because it does explain some things. Like, it expects the player to be willing to think a little bit, right? So the way you're supposed to, according to Feeble King at least, and I largely agree, to fight the way you're supposed to fight Elden Ring bosses is to go up and be aggressive, to use heavies and jumping attacks. In Dark Souls 3, now this goes back to Dark Souls 3, I'm skipping Sekiro for a moment. Haven't played it, actually I played a bit of it, but we'll get there when we get there. Dark Souls 3 is very fast. No. Yeah, yes, Dark Souls 3 is very fast. But you only need to press 2 fucking buttons. Light attack and roll. That's how you win every single fight in Dark Souls 3. You are not motivated or incentivized to use any other type of attack. Flatly. Why bother? So what Elden Ring does is it included the poise mechanic and the stance breaking, which was present in Dark Souls 3, which it is present in Dark Souls 3, but you're not really likely to find it except on a few enemies like the Demon of Pain and the Demon from Below. In my experience so far, those are like the only 2 enemies that actually got stance broken, as far as I know, during my playthrough. Pressing on, Elden Ring bosses have the stance mechanic, where if you hit them, so enemies in Elden Ring have a poise bar. This poise is constantly refilling after every hit, but if you get it down to 0, they slump down, and you can go in and do a critical somewhere around their eye or their head, indicated by a bright glowing orange beam wherever you're supposed to stand and press L1. This is great. The sound design is immaculate. That bing, just crispy. But it doesn't really explain this to the player very well, Elden Ring. And that's fine. It's never explicitly spelled out. It's just something you're supposed to discover. But if you're used to Dark Souls 3, which most people were at the time, you're just gonna play Elden Ring like Dark Souls 3 until the very end. But by the very end, the bosses are so extremely difficult and hard that even though you may have just figured this out, you haven't learned how to execute on it. You're stuck doing, light attack and dodge. Or shield, or whatever. The parry timing is weird on some attacks. And generally, Feeble King made some other complaints about the bosses, other than the lack of teaching. And he's right about the teaching, but jumping attack, or attacks that can be jumped over, are not clearly telegraphed, which is fine. It adds to the immersion, I think. I think it's kind of silly in Sekiro. But Sekiro also keeps you a lot closer to death, so it's more justified mechanically. This is my casual... I'm thinking as I'm talking about that. other issues Feeble had were that it doesn't teach you. That was the crux of his argument. It doesn't teach you, it doesn't show you, things are not telegraphed clearly. And this is an iteration, a development on Joseph Anderson's original critique of the bosses. The other critiques of Elden Ring, both presented by Feeble and Joseph Anderson, the major ones, were the fact that the worlds are boring to explore. As you're exploring the rewards, Elden Ring, let me preface my next incendiary take. That's not that incendiary, but let me preface it with Dark Souls, the art, the music, everything about it, the existence of the world is phenomenal. These are masterpieces of world design and art. Like, cut out all the gameplay and just have the player wander around this world. It wouldn't be a game, but that would be an experience unto itself that would be unmatched. Cut out all the middle enemies and give Elden Ring it's just the bosses. You basically just have Shadow of the Colossus, but better. People will probably get mad at me, but I think you can understand what I mean when I say that. What else was I gonna say? So, exploration was underwhelming because a lot of the rewards throughout Elden Ring, they didn't mean anything. They weren't useful. If you're like a strength build, Unga Bunga, Guts Great Sword, dunk, right? Getting a fucking spell that shoots soul arrows doesn't help you. And the rewards are spells, and more spells. Don't get me wrong, you get swords. Some of them are cool. But a lot of the progression in Elden Ring is exclusively your souls. You don't get interesting rewards because you can't use them. It's like, oh, maybe you get the idea. Maybe if I play this again, I'll come and do a run of these. But it's also like, it's pointless. And on repeat playthroughs of Elden Ring, you're just gonna skip stuff. You just don't care. The rewards aren't worth it. The juice isn't worth the squeeze. The sword that you can't use unless you do a full respec doesn't help you. So the rewards were unfocused. So what? You get the universal reward of souls, or runes in this case. And that's fine. You can always level your character. It's like a consolation prize for, strength builds that here, have a level every once in a while. I know we just gave you 10 spells the last couple times, or some flowers. That's always great. And I agree with these criticisms. I'm making them myself right now. But skip ahead a little bit. Shadow of the Erdtree comes out. It did come out. Stopped raining. But it comes out, and everything's worse, but everything's better. The art, the environmental design has improved, I think. I mean, you can judge for yourself whether or not you agree with me there. But I think it looks better. There's a couple of hitches with the frame rate, but let's not worry about it. These games aren't exactly known for their performance consistency. Blighttown, anyone? No, I never played the original version, the Prepare to Die edition of Dark Souls, but I've heard horror stories. Joseph Anderson and Feeble King split into two camps here. Joseph loved the DLC, and Feeble King hated the DLC. Feeble King found the exploration and rewards to be far worse. This is mainly because progression is not tied to your runes anymore, which means the universal reward of leveling up in the DLC is hugely undercut by the fact the DLC enemies, allegedly, I'm not sure how this actually works because they've never done scaling before in a FromSoft game to my knowledge, but the DLC scales with the player. Cool. So how do you actually get better? Well, you wander around the world hunting for little nuggets of the tree that then upgrade you, that then give you more power. And apparently you get double damage and double health by the end of it, or double damage resistance, roughly. I don't know how to confirm that. I'm just going off of what I think. I think it was what Joseph Anderson said in his video, but besides the point. So, Joseph Anderson, Feeble King. One loved it, one hated it. Feeble King didn't like the bosses because he got tired of just wandering in. He'd gotten tired of finding the fun. And I don't blame him. Finding the fun doesn't get fun after a while. The thing is, you could find the fun. There was fun to be found because the bosses were, as Joseph Anderson pointed out, they were simpler. And they're simpler in the way that they're much more, you get clear. I don't know how to describe how they're simpler, but I agree with Joseph Anderson's assessment of the DLC bosses. They are simpler. They are much more synchronous within themselves. They're not as wildly flailing. Malakath, I did not like Malakath, and I didn't spend that much time. I kind of unga-bunga'd my way through him in the base game. I got stuck on him on my first playthrough, got bored, got it on Xbox. Let's get this out of the way. And beat the game with the DLC, after the DLC had come. But Malakath, it's not my thing. Oh well. But the DLC bosses, I think, get back to what I was saying, but Mesmer and Midra of the Frenzied Flame are probably the best bosses in the DLC. Everyone agrees that Mesmer was the highlight. That is the high point of the DLC, at least mechanically, in the learning of the boss and how he moves and how he feels to fight against. Midra is mechanically fairly simple. He's not that complicated, but he's just a lot to keep track of. And that's fine. Midra is a lot of fun. The bud lady, the big centipede lady, I did not like. I found her animations to be difficult to operate. Or to see with how close the camera is. Also the hippo. Since we're on the topic of the camera, fuck the hippo. The porcupine fucking hippo can go to hell. It's fun on your second or third time. Also, Commander guys. There's a bunch of problems with these bosses. Even if they're fun and understandable, they all have a crippling flaw. Or a crippling aspect of their difficulty that seems like it's kind of bullshit. The hitboxes on Commander Gaius are almost unreadable. Not, or at least on his charging attack. Everyone knows about that. The hippo, the camera, and Joseph Anderson, his video. Camera reminded me of this. The camera in the Dark Souls games has been consistently bad since, as far as I know, Demon Souls. Which I haven't played. I know Dark Souls, the camera's bad. Demon Souls, I wouldn't surprise me. But Joseph Anderson's point that the Souls community is similar to the Bethesda community several years ago, around the time of Skyrim's release, where people were afraid to be negative about the games. I don't think is true. But I also agreed to a certain degree that the point that he made, and the important point that Joseph Anderson made, which Greg Glintstone, another character we'll get to shortly, despised this point, but that toxic positivity isn't working and isn't good for the FromSoft games. But Joseph Anderson is explicitly afraid that because FromSoft can't tell what people actually like and dislike about their games, they're never going to actually get the chance to fix them. Kind of like how there's a bunch of problems that came up in Skyrim and Oblivion and Morrowind that were not addressed or fixed until it was too late and Bethesda had lost its reputation. I think this is a bit of a push on the part of Anderson, but I also don't think it's entirely wrong. I understand the parallels that he's drawing. Whether or not they're actually there is another matter. And I'm not entirely sure. I'm not super tied into the FromSoft community, or at least the player community. What other community is there? But yeah. This is great, by the way. Exploration sucks. But, before, we've already kind of gone over things. Then, Feeble King, he did not like the DLC. I know I kind of wandered through Joseph's section of that, but Feeble King didn't like the DLC. And I understand it. Because he's like, I'm not getting rewarded for anything. I'm just wandering around an empty open world and crushing bosses. Or being crushed by bosses, because it takes me, right? You show, it's like, oh, I'm just going to run to the next boss and get slammed for an hour, and then eventually keep going. And that sucks. I can't, yeah. And he's not entirely wrong either. That is how the DLC kind of feels. The level design is not great. With the exception of Shadowkeep. Shadowkeep is the best goddamn level I've played in a long time. I have one criticism of the level, and that it's too confusing. I cannot remember for the life of me how to get from one end to the other, because it's like you have like two separate levels that are squished. It's more like three, but really there's like two levels that are squished on top of each other and then twisted around each other, and they don't cross over. You can see the other level, but you can't get to it without going outside of the castle, running around, doing another boss, and then entering from a different angle. Cool. It just gets kind of old, man. That's not true. I don't like having levels where it's too interlaced. It's a cool idea, but I wish there was more overlap so I could move around easier. But that's not a problem if you have teleports, right? When you can warp between bonfires. That was another issue that people had with Elden Ring and the DLC as the extension. You could just travel. The world has no tension. You can just run away from enemies. But I also think that just wandering around the fields in Elden Ring, at least certainly in like Liurnia and the lower section, like the starting area, I can't remember what it's called, is compelling in and of itself. Wandering around the world is fine. It's interesting, and even if you're running around enemies, you still have to think. You still have to navigate the world with intention to either avoid enemies or to engage with them. But you still have to think, and you do have to engage with them. So that criticism is kind of, it's a different type of gameplay. It's not necessarily as good, but it's certainly different. Anyway, Feeble's problems. They were okay. I think I went over all of them. He didn't like the bosses. But he also did like the boss. Like, everyone loves Mesmer. If you don't like Mesmer, what are you doing? Like, did you get beat as a child? Mesmer's awesome. I mean, I can understand that Mesmer beating you might not make you enjoy, the fight, but if you enjoy these games, you'll enjoy Mesmer. If nothing else in the DLC, Mesmer is great. Radahn. It took me the better part of a week to beat Radahn, and I have never felt better after beating a boss. Nothing in my entire time playing these games, Dark Souls 1, Dark Souls 3, Elden Ring and its DLC, and bits of Sekiro and bits of Dark Souls 2, nothing compares to beating Radahn. I used Mimic Tear, I used the Summon outside, I didn't have all the Erdtree bits, so I wasn't full power. Nevertheless, Radahn was obviously it's painfully hard. And he has some issues. Upon release, because there was an attack that allegedly was undodgeable, where he would swing twice, and if you rolled one, you wouldn't have enough recovery frames to roll the next, even with light armor. The only way you could do this is by hugging his right leg. Hugging his right leg, it constrained the fight. They patched this eventually, which is good. And I only beat the boss after that patch. In fact, I didn't even get to the boss until after the patch. But Joseph loved it. Joseph loved the DLC. He hated the community. Feeble didn't like the community and didn't like the DLC. And people told him to go to hell. People did not like Feeble King's video. Which I understand, because some people probably did love the DLC, like Joseph. But I also think that Feeble it's fine. It goes back to something which those guys talked about a lot. Subjectivity is implied. No, some stuff is subjective. We'll get to this in a second. But Greg Glintstone, did a 2-hour video where he kind of eviscerated these guys. And I don't know what to make of his video. I liked the video. It's entertaining. It's interesting. But it's also demeaning. And he makes a lot of incredibly incendiary comments. Incredibly incendiary. Where he's just basically like, he calls Feeble King sycophantic. It's like, wow, that's something else. And I think Greg either was doing this for views, but that can't be the case, because you don't spend months or weeks making a 2.5-hour long video where you take down 2 of the most popular YouTubers in the gaming scene and then just walk off into the sunset, which is what he's done. He basically has like 2 other video essays on his channel, and I could be been a couple days. Yeah. He does a lot of challenge runs in these games, and that's most of what his channel is. So doing the 2.5-hour takedown of 2 of the most popular guys around is a little nuts. Anyway, I like Greg's video. Wish you the best if you watch this, but you probably won't, because this is like my first video. This is my second video. My second actual video. And so far, I think, what are we doing here? It's like half-hour long? Something like that. Do you get it? These games are great, visually. That's besides the point. And then Feeble. I'm not going to go over the 2 hours that Greg spent on these guys, but he basically called them out for being idiots. And to a certain degree, I do agree with a lot of Greg's points. Joseph Anderson being wrong about the number of frames it takes for Godwin's wind attack to come out is technically, I'm going to take his word for it. Actually, the jury's still out on how many frames it takes for his Godwin's wind attack that Joe complained about to come out. Because Joe says it's 20, Greg says it's 38. And he slows down the footage so you can see every frame. I don't know when it starts. I can't tell. So I'm going to take his word for it and say it's 38. I see, even though I counted like 26, 13, and I could just be schizophrenic on this one, but 38 seems a little bit more reasonable. That's 38 frames if you're running. That's the other thing. Are you running 30 frames or 60 frames? Because if it's 38 frames at 60 frames a second, that's half a second. That's pretty tight. That's not undodgeable. It's like, what, 200 milliseconds is the human reaction speed? That doesn't sound right. But regardless, if you're running 30 frames a second, that's like a second and a third. It's 1 1/3 seconds before you get to. So, what's the deal, Greg? Can you pin out? Not that you're going to, but can you show me which exact frames? I'm spending too much time on this. But Greg's video. Feeble responded to it. And Feeble made some points about Gred's video that were entirely true. Gred seemed to get a lot of stuff very wrong. Kind of like where he would cut things out of context. Like the part where in Feeble King's original video, he's like, actually no, Feeble King got a lot of backlash for his original video. Then he got another video. Then he did a video responding to his critics, and then Gred did his video, and then Feeble King did a video responding to Gred's video. But problem in Feeble's second video, first video he talks about the Death Knights, and he included them in a list of NPC bosses which he thought were stupid to... They didn't drop a Shadow Tree fragment. There was something he didn't like about them. I don't remember what specifically. I probably will in like 30 seconds. But Feeble King didn't like them, and he clumped them together, the Death Knights. Another great mini-boss. They show up twice, and I loved them. Most people seem to like them, but it's a fun fight to learn and overcome, I thought. Now, he said that he clumped them in with things he didn't like. Then people took this and said he doesn't like the Death Knights. Everyone loves the Death Knights. And he's like, wait, no, guys. In his second video, he's like, wait, no, guys, this isn't... I do like the Death Knights, but it's not that simple. There's some... Other criticism. My bad for not explaining that clearly. My bad for not, making it clear that I did like the Death Knights, and that was just... They were being clumped as a symptom or part of a symptom of a problem that he was complaining about. Gred then took this section of the video, chopped off the bit that was about how he was wrong for this. So he was wrong about something, that he says he's wrong, then he explains himself and says that he was wrong, that he should have clarified, and then Gred goes and doesn't include the part where he says, yes, I was wrong in this, here. So what's the deal, Gred? I understand the 2.5-hour video is a lot of work, and I respect the grind, brother. I respect the grind. But that was just easy. You could have caught that in editing. So, are you the grifter? Because you call these guys grifters. But you're also a challenge runner who makes pretty good challenge videos. I like your videos. I watch them. What's going on, man? Feeble. I don't know what to tell you. I like your videos. You're also kind of a bitch. And this isn't gonna go well because my face is on the internet. I'm tied to this. Joseph is overrated. I'll give you that. The Witcher 3 video. Don't care. Sorry. That's a bummer. Anyway. This is such a bad... I don't know what to tell you guys. Whoever watches this, thanks. More to come. Don't you worry.